that would be the only kind of shining light in this, is that maybe it does go through just because they're going to ignore a lot of stuff in favor of having another chip giant in the US and what the potential there is. And the need for that as well. The need for moving chip production away from contested areas like Taiwan or China or other areas in the Far East. Hi there, and welcome to Stock Club, a podcast brought to you by My Wall Street. I'm Mike, and joining me today is My Wall Street's chief investor, Emmet Savage. Emmet, how are you doing?
How are you doing, Mike?
I'm good now. I was asking how you're doing. I know how you're doing because we've been frustrated messing with audio for the last 15 minutes before recording this, so you've been in better form.
Yeah, it's like every single remote meeting starts off with an IT project. 20 years ago, when you went into an office, if you plugged in your laptop to a projector, if it didn't work, you rang someone or you disappeared under a desk and started looking at connectors going into a flap on the floor. But now you're left to it. You have to figure out this vast array of technology all on your own EOS. So that's the price of us getting rid of our 32-track recording studio in the middle of Dublin City, which was very cheap. You can only imagine.
Yeah, we don't have the luxury of an IT guy anymore.
No, we're it.
Right, before we
Other
get
than
into
that, I'm in great fun.
other than that, before we get into this show, you have an offer for our podcast listeners.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a sneak peek, but you're right. It's going to morph into an offer, Mike. And I guess what I'm going to talk about is the next stock pitch I'm going to hit Horizon members with, which I describe as a mini Topicus, or better still, a micro Constellation Software. And Constellation Software is a Canadian vertical acquisition machine from Canada that buys up small or medium-sized software companies and has grown 100x since it IPO'd, actually way over 100x since it IPO'd. And I'm as good as certain that there's no listener, with only one exception, who's ever heard of the company that I'm going to pitch in Horizon today, despite the company being probably as old as I am. Well, it's about to unleash a new strategy that a master in the area of successful serial acquisitions is overseeing. I actually had a different business set to pitch this month. However, I've replaced it with this one, as it's as hidden as a hidden gem can be, and I want to own it, which is really what happens when I pitch a stock in Horizon. When I particularly like it, I end up buying it in the subsequent weeks or months. And on top of that, I sit here all year primarily researching stocks and secondarily writing and recording. But I can tell you this, there's a handful of companies you encounter that appear to be truly hidden and truly ready to grow. And this is both. It's hidden and it looks like a coiled spring about to pop. So the author of 100 Baggers and Where to Find Them, Chris Mayer, who I interviewed on this podcast probably a year ago at this stage, told me about the business when we were chatting, and we kind of took a long conversation about it. So I dived in and I'm genuinely excited. So that's coming today, Thursday, September 26th. We're offering a significant discount on Horizon to 5 new members, just 5 members. And if you're interested, email us at pod@mywallstreet.com with the subject line Horizon, and my colleague Frank the Tank will come back to you.
Frank the Tank. Brilliant. Okay, so that's pod@mywallstreet.com, pod@mywallstreet.com. Where are we going first, Emmet? There's chaos over at 23andMe, which is a very strange place to have chaos when it has hundreds of millions of people's DNA on file. So set the scene for us.
Yeah, well, I am definitely an arm's length expert in the industry, Mike, because apart from the fact that I'm a customer of 23andMe, which I'll talk about, I'm an investor in the industry, you could say, since the mid to late 90s. So I'd like to start in setting the scene by talking about that for a minute, talking about the industry that was genomic engineering back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And those around my age and interest set will recall the Human Genome Project, which was a groundbreaking initiative that began in around 1990 with the goal of mapping the entire human genome, which consists of approximately 3 billion base pairs and is massively complex. And I know we have AI computing now. Back in the early 90s, this was a formidable task that was set out. And it was being led, as these things, breakthrough innovations usually are, by America, by the United States, and specifically in the US, the National Institute of Health and the US Department of Energy, of all things, were the two main US state bodies. And the project aimed to provide this really comprehensive blueprint of a human DNA because it was tantamount to a mystery at that stage. And as far as I recall, they started with a mouse or a mosquito before they moved on to a human. But, you know, one, two, skip a few, 99, 100, crash, bang, wallop. By 2003, the project was completed. There you go, Mr. President. There's your human. I'll leave it on the table. I'm going to the pub. Thanks very much. Well, let me rewind a little bit because there's a guy called Craig Venter who was such a prominent biotechnologist. And he founded a company called Celera Genomics in 1998. And this particular business introduced an innovative method of sequencing the human gene, of figuring it out bit by bit, called shotgun sequencing, which really accelerated the process of mapping the human genome. And next thing, Craig Venter was on the front of every magazine. So I had all these magazines always falling through my letterbox in the late 90s. And I can tell you now that Craig Venter was at that time as well known as Jeff Bezos. Like, there's no question about it. Anyone who's my age will go, oh yeah, Craig Venter, I remember that guy. Well, Celera's technique worked by fragmenting the genome into smaller parts, sequencing them rapidly, and then using, at the time, very sophisticated algorithms to put them all back together again. So that's the way I would describe it. So this competitive approach to mapping the human genome sparked a race with the public Human Genome Project. However, in 2000, both of them collaborated to announce a rough draft of the human genome, which totally reminds me of SpaceX and NASA today, where a private upstart and a government agency eventually collaborate. Well, Celera initially pursued patents on certain gene sequences, which is crazy. Like, when you think about it, come here to me. Which one of you lads is lodging the patent on blue eyes? That was Mark Boss. Where is he? You fired him, boss. You fired him. Hold on. Did he take the blue eye file with him? He did, actually. Oh, geez, he's gone. So, like, Celera was putting a patent on genes, which at the time, I actually, what am I talking about at the time? Even to this day, I'm like, I don't really quite get that. But
Yeah, it's
eventually, what they
probably a
did,
thing where no one understood it enough to realize what was happening, essentially.
like, I mean, like, not to dive into patents, and I know as a fact there's a couple of patent lawyers who listen to this podcast, so here we go. I'm going to wade into waters of ignorance, but it needs to be something with an inventive quality that I think you can touch, you know, like to put a patent on a gene. But anyway, look, Celera eventually made much of their data publicly available, which really kind of contributed to the collective effort. Now, apart from Celera, which I was an investor in for absolutely ages. I mean, what was its ticker? A CLRA. There were loads of other biotech companies around that time, like Millennium Pharmaceuticals, for example, which was founded in 1993 or thereabouts. And I was also a shareholder of that, and its ticker was MLNM. And it was one of the leading companies that capitalized on genomics for drug discovery, which is a very practical application of the pursuit for all of us. And it was acquired by a company called Takeda in 2008. And then there was Insight Genomics, and it was established in 1991. And it built this giant, vast genomic database that pharma companies could use to, again, hone or find out or whatever it is they do to make new drugs. So there was so many companies. And then there was the OG, the one that we all know, which is Illumina, which was founded in 1998. And I think everyone who listens to this podcast will have at least heard of Illumina, because it's been on the go as a public company for years and years and years. And it revolutionized genetic medicine by also developing cutting edge sequencing technologies. And basically, Illumina's machines became integral to private and public sequencing because they massively reduced the cost of the process of sequencing genomes, which made large-scale genetic research more accessible for everything, personalized medication and all that kind of stuff. And just as whenever I hear the word Activision, I think of the number 11 because it was stuck at $11 for about, I looked at Activision shares. I mentioned this in a podcast before. I looked at Activision shares every day when I was young, and you do that kind of thing. And for about 6 years, all I saw was 11. But whenever I hear the word Illumina, I just think gene chip erased. Like I know, and I think everyone when they think when they hear Illumina, just think gene chip erased. It's like kind of like their strapline, even though it's what they do. It's unbelievable. Like what the hell is a gene chip array? I think I could pull it off. I could probably explain it. But anyway, Illumina gene chip arrays, they were the ones. They were the winner. And when you see a new industry, whether it's the dot-com industry or whether it's a SPAC gold rush or whether, and I know there's an industry, but as a movement or even AI, there's an awful lot of pretenders, and then there's a couple that emerge as giants. And Illumina is the giant that emerged, and it's still a leader today. And it was about $1 a share. Illumina was only $1 a share in 2003, and it went on to grow about 500 fold,
Wow.
500 fold. And now it's fallen back to about $130 a share, but it's up 130 fold from
Yeah, yeah.
2003, which nobody would argue with. And there's more. So let me keep going because there's a lot to this story, but it's all coming back to 23andMe. So around the same time, there was a company called Human Genome Sciences, HGSI was its ticker. How do I know? Because I also had shares in it, as I did Illumina. And it was founded in 1992, and it focused on using genomic data to develop new drugs. And again, partnered with, actually, it was acquired by GlaxoSmithKline in 2012, which I think I benefited from. I can't remember for sure. But all of this is to illustrate the excitement and the rush of capital that was focused on the area of genetic sequencing and the medicines that pursuit can actually bring to humankind. Which brings me to 2006, which is kind of when the heat had gone out of the movement, and we'd all bought shares in one of those names that I mentioned, and most of us, including me, had sold all of them. But along comes 2006, and 23andMe was founded by Anne Wojcicki, who I will simply refer to
As Anne.
who
NW.
I will simply refer to as Anne. Okay, as Anne. Henceforth on this podcast, I'm just going to call her Anne because I'm down with it. And then it was co-founded by Anne and Linda Avey and Paul Cosenza. And its goal, 23andMe's goal, was to make genetic information accessible to the public. Simple as that. So Anne, by the way, and this is kind of one of those, again, I dread being unoriginal, and I'm sure everyone knows this, but let me throw it out there in case they don't. She's related to a former CEO of Google because Anne is the sister of Susan Wojcicki, who from now on I'm just going to call Susan. And Susan was the CEO of YouTube until February 2023. So Susan, Anne's sister, was an early employee of Google. And guess what? She rented out her garage, or garage as we say in Ireland, to the Google co-founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, when they were starting the company in 1998. I mean, how cool is that? I'd love to know, what's the Irish garage equivalent of Google? Because for a start, I don't know any business that was started in an Irish garage
Jesus.
because they barely are big enough for a car
I was about to
usually. But
say, yeah,
anyway,
we don't have enough garages, really, do we? That seems like a rich person thing.
no. It's probably something like licking blocks for cattle. I rented out my garage to Paddy O'Shaughnessy, who's the CEO of licking blocks up there in Termonfeckin, and sure, he's captured the whole loud market for licking blocks. And what's he doing now? He's moving into licking blocks for husbands. They just you stick beside the fridge and they lick it when they're peckish. Anyway, look, where am I? Oh yeah, so either way, 23andMe's name refers to the fact that there are 23 pairs of chromosomes found in human cells, in most people's human cells, and its primary product is a saliva-based DNA test that allows consumers to get insights into their ancestry and their traits and their genetic dispositions and all those kind of things, and even it gives your family ammo to slag you, to kind of lampoon you. I don't know what the word slagging is in America. It's an Irish thing where basically you just rib somebody for the rest of their days. But
I
anyway,
was about
in
to say,
2008,
if any people is lagging you, it wouldn't be your family because they have the exact same genes.
well, you should move in here because I tell you what, my family have had a few goes at me because you see, we're all descendants of Neanderthals.
That's,
And the Neanderthals were an enlightened bunch, you see.
that
They
explains the
had
big head.
education. Yeah, look at me. Seriously, like, so
I don't. I
and
definitely
also,
don't need to do that test because I would be right there with
well,
you.
yeah, there you go, you big old Neanderthal. So now I've joined the bullying crew. But anyway, we all have a certain percentage of genes that are common with a Neanderthal ancestor. And I had slightly more. So of course, my family, despite my sons being my sons, I'm absolutely certain decided this was hilarity itself. So anyway, so 23andMe opens a door that some people would prefer to leave closed. And in 2008, like Time Magazine called it the invention of the year, because it brought DNA testing to everyday people for an affordable price. I think it started with about $300, and now I think, depending on what time of year you buy and if they have an offer going, you can probably get it for $100, which certainly brings in the question, like, you know, should they pay you for your
Well, yeah,
for
that's a good segue in here, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah, what's that thing they say about Facebook? If you don't know what the product is, you're it. But anyway, not to
Yeah,
go there. I subscribed a few years after I was watching the industry, as I said, invested in the industry for the longest time, and I subscribed to 23 a few years later after that time, a magazine article. And I have to say, I was completely amazed at the insights. I mean, I was utterly knocked sideways, utterly amazed, because really, you're sent a small little vial in the post. You expectorate into it, which is the polite word for you spit into it, and you send it back to California. And then a couple of weeks later, you log on, and it started off by identifying I was a Caucasian male with blue eyes. Probably, if I'm an adult, I'm 187 centimeters tall, and and my hair is likely turning grey, gone grey, or started to recede. And you're reading it, you're going, holy schmoly. And then it starts to identify, now look at your toes, your second toe in, it has a certain attribute, and it's telling you things that you didn't even notice about yourself.
yeah,
And very quickly you've bought into the, um, I suppose, what would you say, the interrogative power that this service has. And truly, everything they say after the first few minutes, you're taking as this must be true, because there's the things you know are true. Then there's the things you can inspect on yourself that you never noticed and realize are true. And then there's a third category, which are things you can neither inspect um, nor did you know. But it's almost like looking into a crystal ball, which some people really, really don't like. So, about 10 years ago, on that very subject, the US Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, which I think everybody knows, ordered it to stop providing health related reports because of concerns about their accuracy and claims on the potential impact on consumers. Now, I had already clicked on everything and read everything, and it gave me the probability of me acquiring or forming or developing, or whatever the right word is, uh, the probability of the 400 most prevalent ailments known to humankind. So that's quite a lot of
yeah. That's
information to sit
probably
down and
too
decide.
much information for the average person, no?
Exactly, and that's what the FDA had a beef with. Like, it's TMI. It's like, you can't just tell someone 3 clicks whether or not they're going to have Alzheimer's, because that's, well, it's a whole new way to find out, and I can speak to the experience, because really, you need to be quite strong. It took me a while to decide I wanted to do it, because I knew that a company would have my genetic information. Then it took me a while to you have to click 3 times on a padlock. It keeps saying, are you sure you can't unsee this? Are you sure you're
Yes,
sure?
yes,
Because
yes.
this report. And I clicked my way through, and I was, you're kind of going, geez, I might die. I might die screaming alone in a cave. Like, this next screen is going to tell me something I don't want to hear. But I was happy enough. Like, I mean, it wasn't that I saw something that I saw things I can't unsee, but I didn't see something that uh, had an impact on me. But anyway, look, it's not about me. Come back to 23andMe. That feature, if you like, or that service disappeared for a good while, a good long duration. Suddenly I logged in one day to have another look at one specific thing, all gone. It was just back to a picture of a caveman, and it telling me how much I'm like a caveman, or, where my mother's and father's old genes came from before intercontinental travel, which I think was 400 years ago, because they have human DNA mapped from every part of the world, so they can pretty much tell you exactly where your great maternal and paternal grandparents came from. And the short answer for me was Ireland. It basically, I logged in and it showed me a potato and it said, "That's you.
Yeah,
You're a potato."
there's two slices of bread.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
I've seen that a
And I
lot
think
with
most of
that.
us are the
I've
same.
seen
We
a
look
lot
at
with a lot of Irish people. It's not very diverse at all.
it's not at all. But I did have one surprise, which was 0.1%, 0. Sorry, 0.01% of my gene. I was 99.99% potato and 0.01% Cherokee. I was like, no, like Native American. What the hell happened 400 years ago? That's one of my great so on grandparents met a Cherokee. So that was kind of interesting to me, and it was the only great surprise. So anyway, look, as I said, it's not about me. I just want to let me push on because this 23andMe story is quite it's really unbelievable. So again, by 2017, all that stuff, the health related stuff, they got FDA approval for providing limited health reports. And I got an email, hey, guess what? We can tell you now about your health. Now, it was an en masse email, presuming that nobody was on the service from the very start and had already seen everything. But it was allowed to report on those conditions like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and so on. So subscribers like me could worry themselves sick all over again. So in 2018, rather, I mean, say 23andMe formed a collaboration again with good old fashioned GlaxoSmithKline, who are clearly forerunners on partnering with these type of businesses, specifically for genetic data for drug discovery and development, which is what they do. And at last, the business went public. In 23andMe went public in June 2021 through a merger with a special purpose acquisition company, or SPAC, which is a dirty word, called VG Acquisition Corp, which was backed by Richard Branson's Virgin. And the deal valued 23andMe at about $3.5 billion dollars, and it provided 23andMe with cash infusion of about $760 million. So suddenly and overnight, the business was public, it was floated, it had 760 odd million in the bank. And you would think, wow, there's a company set up for continued success. Well, let me tell you what's happened since then, just from an investor's perspective. And I think our listeners will know that most SPACs, all SPACs perhaps, but I'm just going to say most SPACs launch at a price of $10 a share. That was their thing. That is their thing. That was their thing. And it launched at $10 a share. 23andMe, its ticker symbol was ME, M-E. And a couple of weeks later, in January 2021, it was just nearly $13 a share. It was $12.94 a share. So it had a 29% upside on its $10 back IPO price, or listing price, not an IPO process. Fast forward to today, Thursday, 26th of September, and it's 33 cents a share.
Wow.
Its market cap is $171 million. I mean, this had a price tag on it of 3.5 billion only a couple of years ago. And then boom, it went down to 33 cents per share. So simply put, the company has struggled very significantly from a financial perspective. I think primarily because you pay once, you only buy once. You ideally want to buy shares in a business that can has a lifetime customer value beyond just one single paycheck. Revenues declined, stock prices just been vaporized, and it led to compliance issues with NASDAQ. So, in response, CEO Anne, with that surname that I'm not going to try, she holds significant voting power in the company and has expressed intentions to take the company private again, which caused friction within the company, leading to the mass resignation of its independent board members last week.
Okay, wow, that's some scene set there. We got a history lesson, we got a finance lesson, we got a science lesson. So tell us about the mass resignation and where the company is now.
Yeah, well, all seven independent directors of the board resigned last
Oh wow,
Tuesday
okay.
of last week. They were like, goodbye.
That is a
Yeah, so it was
serious
big.
sign. Wow.
Oh no, it was an exodus, and they were citing disagreements over the CEO's plan to take the company private, which left just one sitting member of the board, Anne. She was like, "Have you ever been?
Uh,
You know this expression? Oh, it's lonely at the top. Well, it sure is when you're the only one at a board
well, there's
meeting. You're just sitting there in your
no one
tie.
to disagree with her anymore, I suppose.
You'd have to run from one side of the table and disagree with yourself." But anyway, what happened? She had submitted a proposal in late July to take the company private, as I said, after expressing interest in acquiring the company back in April. And the board's special committee rejected this proposal because it didn't have a premium to the closing price at the time, which at the time was a massive 40 cent per share because it had no committed financing as well. So they gave Anne, CEO, quote, a limited amount of additional time to revise her proposal to take the company private. And in their letter last Tuesday, the board members wrote very publicly, quote, after months of work, we have yet to receive from you a fully financed, fully diligenced, actionable proposal that is in the best interests of the non-affiliated shareholders. We believe the special committee and the board have provided ample time for you to submit such a proposal. That we have not seen any notable progress over the last 5 months leads us to believe no such proposal is forthcoming. And the letter continued, adding that there be no further extension to revise such proposal. And I think all of this, Mike, stems from the deficiency letter that they got hit with from the NASDAQ listing qualifications department. I think that's what they're called, back in November, saying that they had 180 days to bring the share price back to $1. Because when that letter arrives for public for a floated company, really focus the attention. Are they going to do a reverse split? What are they going to do? They realize things have not gone to plan. Anyway, she sent a memo to employees on Tuesday of this week saying she was surprised and disappointed by the resignations and doubling down on her commitment to take the company private. And every married man, Mike, you're not in this club yet, their blood runs cold with terror when they hear the words surprised and disappointed, which is almost always accompanied by this feeling of not knowing what you did wrong. You're like, why? Why? What did I do? Why are you surprised and disappointed? Anyway, Anne, CEO, was surprised and disappointed. And she went on to say, I remain committed to our customers, my employees, and to our stockholders to achieve our goals. And then she said, I continue to believe that we will be better positioned to achieve our mission and goals outside of the short term pressures of the public markets, and that taking 23andMe private will be the best opportunity for long term success. We will immediately begin identifying independent directors to join the board, she continued. I want to thank the directors for their service to the company and its stockholders.
Wow. Okay. So it doesn't sound like it's going too well for Anne and all the rest.
Yeah.
So you seem a bit of an expert on this whole business. At least that's what you've proffered in the last half an hour. Would you take a board seat if it was offered to you?
I would take, Mike, I'd take a board seat if it meant I could 100% delete my data from their servers as a payment in kind. I've actually commenced a process of deletion, which is a process. And I just don't like the idea that they have a copy of me in their filing cabinet. I mean, by the way, 23andMe experienced a really significant data breach in October 2023. Yeah, just nearly a year ago, where the personal data and genetic details of millions of users has been, accessed by hackers. So like somewhere in a lab in Wuhan, there's a giant row of specimen jars where they're growing a new version of a million
Trying to,
23andMe
they're
customers.
trying to
You can
regrow
walk
a
along.
Neanderthal from your genes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe the second shot will be better than the first. So yeah, somewhere there's this in this dark, be chambered room in the middle of Wuhan. You walk along all these specimen jars. Go, geez, there's Emmet Savage, gas man.
The brow,
Anyway, yeah,
the
I take
brow
a
is
board seat.
just
Of course,
getting
I would
lower and
rather not.
lower on him.
Anyway, so that's 23andMe, and the plot continues, the plot thickens. It's one to keep watching. It's an interesting story.
Yeah, geez, for a company that has that much incredibly delicate data, I will say, on millions of people, you really don't like to hear that kind of governance. Every board member
No,
popping up being like, "See ya, you're a mess."
no, you just, I mean, and a hack, come on. It's like hearing your stock brokerage firm is being hacked or your bank is being hacked. They need to have the highest level of digital encryption and safety. Back in the old days in the Wild West, every bank had a chief safe officer, which was generally a guy responsible for making sure the safe couldn't be blown open by dynamite. Well, in businesses today, the chief safe officer is generally the CIO, chief information officer, or indeed the chief security officer, but it is the most important thing to get right. Whatever about your commercial endeavors or your product endeavors or your customer experience and user and journey mapping and all that kind of stuff is super important. But if you have handed a company your genetic information and they have you, they know you, they've proven they know you, and then it's hacked, that's just, to me, that's, I really should have commenced the deletion before they were hacked. Now I know what I should have done.
Yeah, yeah. Hindsight's 2020.
Oh yeah, brilliant! I'm absolutely expert at it. Look, come on, let's move on. This thing we could natter about it all day, but I think there's a story over at Intel
Yeah.
of all companies. I mean, Sleepy Hollow from the tech. As far as I'm concerned, Intel is also a very '90s company that is barely ever discussed anymore.
Well,
So
that's a great point to
yeah.
kick off on, because I was going to say, when we're talking about Intel, we may as well do a pop quiz. So,
Oh,
over the past 24 years, what do you think Intel's performance has been as a stock? And I'll leave the
okay.
witness
No.
a small bit. 24 years ago was the peak of its dot-com bubble price.
Uh huh. Okay, that's fair enough. So I'm going to ignore it. It doesn't pay dividends, does it?
It just paused them. So, technically, no.
Okay, well, we're going to ignore dividends. We're going to talk just simply the share price performance, is it?
Yeah.
24 years. I'm going to presume I'm going to guess it's down 30%.
Stock is down
30.
70%. If you own
Yeah,
shares
that's not.
in September of 2000 at $75 a pop, you'd be down at $23 each from today's price. So,
Yeah.
yeah, what a company.
Ouch. I remember about 27 years ago, I had to write a piece, maybe for the Motley Fool, and it was like, what's the one stock you'd buy and hold for the rest of your life? Or I think it was three, and I certainly had Intel as a choice because at that time it just like the business that would never, ever, ever go anywhere but up.
Yeah.
I mean, they had such an incredible moat around their business and competitive position. And then we see what happens. So talk to us. Why are we talking about it today, though, Mike?
So it's basically become an acquisition target. There's a few sharks circling. We're going to talk about Qualcomm first. People will know Qualcomm is one of Apple's most important suppliers. It creates mobile chips. It's a giant in the industry, especially in China. So it seems like a funny acquisition, but when you kind of break it down a bit more, acquiring Intel would open it up to personal computer market, servers market, diversify its revenue away from mobile, and it would actually turn it into one of the largest chip makers in the world by revenue, at least, and
Hmm.
stature as well. Do you know what I mean? I know it's not anywhere near
Hmm.
Nvidia's 3 trillion, but the 80 something million a year, 80 something billion wouldn't be far off. Um, what Nvidia's taken in. So before the takeover rumors, Intel was sitting at about $90 billion. Qualcomm was around double that. It's definitely opportunistic timing from Qualcomm. Things have been absolutely awful at Intel lately. It missed the AI boat completely, and as you can imagine, it suffered incredibly because of it. It's weird to see at a time of like such hype around the semiconductor industry, the one of the biggest names, probably most notable name, at least before we kind of were on this Nvidia craze, was Intel, and it's been absolutely suffering while all the rest have been doing so well. So the stock is down about 60% year to date before this acquisition talk. It
Wow.
just announced a loss of 1.6 billion in Q2 compared to a profit of 1.5 billion a year ago. It had to pause its dividend, as we were talking about, and it's looking at major
Mm.
layoffs as well. So the CEO Patrick Gelsinger last month, he laid out a roadmap to slash costs by more than 10 billion quid in 2025. So it's not looking good over there. Like I suppose you're looking for positives because it's like, well, why is it looking to be acquired? Do you know what I mean? So it did just sign a big
Mm.
deal with AWS to manufacture chips at its facilities, and it's going to benefit from, the CHIPS Act, where the
Yeah.
Biden administration is basically trying to bring domestic semiconductor production home. So it looks like it's due for It was originally 8.5 billion, and then just last week it was announced it would be applicable for another 3 billion quid from that. So it's a bit like probably one of the main reasons why Qualcomm is sniffing around is that, like, it's these beautiful women miraculously found out they really love their new husband after he won the lottery. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Hey, Mr. Genders, it's these guys fell in love with their wife after they won the
yeah,
lotto.
12 billion quid coming. Is it? Oh, Intel is looking very attractive all of a sudden. So yeah, there's a
But you know something, Mike? I mean, back in the day in the 90s, when you bought to buy when you went in to buy a laptop, there was a tiny little shiny sticker inside it which said Intel inside, which reminded people, of course, that there was guts inside the machine, and you felt good that there was an Intel Pentium processor or
Intel
whatever it
Pentium
was.
processor. I was just about to say, I think everyone can remember that ad. No one knew what it meant, but
Yeah, that's right.
whatever ad was on
Amazing.
TV with the Intel Pentium processor.
That's right.
Yeah,
It's amazing. They'd actually managed to convince the buying public with a fancy sounding word and a little, what do you call it, a little chirpy sound. I don't know what you call it. I don't know what you call it, chime. That this thing was therefore higher quality. And you might look at an Acer laptop and find it had an AMD chip, and you're like, no, I want
yeah,
Intel, which is ridiculous. Although I'm sure there's the AI equivalent now. People feel better to know there's NVIDIA inside.
for sure, for sure. Um, but yeah, so I think the big question is, and much of the commentary has been whether this deal will go through or not. And like,
Yeah,
as the resident antitrust expert on this pod, I can answer very confidently, as always, because I
yeah.
always get
Tell
these
me.
questions for some reason. But
Huh.
if it does go through, it's actually, fun fact, it would be the largest ever acquisition, coming in around, probably you could assume around 100 billion quid. It would overtake Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard by like 30 billion, I'd say.
Oof. Well, so, but based on that metric alone, you'd say it's unlikely. I mean, based on nothing other than the fact that it's the largest, and you can infer, therefore, deals of that size are less favorably considered.
Oh,
But
100%. But not even that, but like, regulators hate semiconductor acquisitions. Nvidia tried to
mm,
buy ARM a couple of years ago, fell through. Broadcom
yeah,
tried to buy Qualcomm, fell through. Qualcomm tried to buy NXP Semiconductors, it fell through as well. And this would be bigger
yeah,
than any of those at the time were. So I mean, immediately, I'm completely agreeing with you. Like, there's no way this goes through. We've seen the track history, the size of it, but there is a big kind of extended. However, we mentioned the Chips Act earlier, and the importance of the US recognizing basically that all these semiconductors, which are so vitally important to how the world runs now, are being made elsewhere. An awful lot is especially being made in Taiwan, between Taiwan
mm, mm,
Semiconductors, which is
mm,
incredibly, incredibly important business. Now, when you take into account the geopolitical risks that are involved there and what could happen, and a lot of people think will happen with China eventually, what happens then? Um, so I would 100% say no, there's no chance this will go through because we've seen that they don't like chip acquisitions and all the rest. But if you're merging two huge US chip powerhouses together, would that be beneficial enough to outweigh the antitrust concerns involved? Um, so that would be the only kind of shining light in this, is that maybe it does go through just because they're going to ignore a lot of stuff in favor of having another chip giant in the US and what the potential there is, and the need for that as well, the need for moving chip production away from contested areas like Taiwan or China or other areas in the Far East. So yeah, it's definitely questionable, but there might actually be a ray of hope for it.
mm, mm. Can you imagine the complexity of integrating those two organizations? Like, acquisitions are complex, but when you just think about the heritage and capability of Qualcomm, and then you consider Intel, and sure, of course, they both sell fancy chips, but when you try and push them together for efficiencies, that would be one major project. I mean, to
100%.
put it lightly.
And like, we were talking about
So what?
foundries and fabs and all the rest, and like, we're going to get into Intel opening up like tens of billions of dollars worth of in one factory. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
crazy.
It is absolutely crazy. And Intel have a long heritage here in Ireland. They've been a huge employer of people out in Leixlip in County Kildare since the 90s. They're not a business that kind of just blew in post-dot-com bubble. They've been around for, I'd imagine, 30 years. So they're a huge employer, and one that have touched the lives of a lot of families in Ireland. Come here to me. Talk to me about Apollo.
So
What about Apollo?
so this is where you mentioned lease slip, and this is where we're kind of going to get into it. So once I'd say this is, I don't know, you can kind of speculate about Apollo's motivations, but basically once they heard that Intel might be on the table, they came running. So Apollo Global Management is a giant asset manager. It's got more than 500 billion in assets under management. So it's absolutely huge. It came in with essentially an alternative offer to Intel. It was like, don't be acquired. We'll give you 5 billion quid in the form of an equity investment, which is quite odd considering Apollo really focuses on complex financial structures and alternative investments and stuff like that. This is very away from its usual type of investment, but there is this existing relationship, and it goes back to Leixlip. So back in June,
Mm.
Intel agreed to sell Apollo 49% of the chip plant it's building in Leixlip for 11 billion quid. So you imagine that's a 22 billion and change fab being built in Leixlip, and Apollo owns half of that. And that was to do with financing the whole project and all the rest. So maybe Apollo is in some way protecting its interests there, in that if Qualcomm comes in, what's the future of that project and stuff like that. So from an Irish perspective, you probably would be rooting for Apollo in this situation. And considering
Mm.
everything else involved in terms of antitrust and how difficult an acquisition like this would be to go through, maybe it's the more realistic option. I don't really know. It's a very interesting spot to be in. People are clearly eyeing up a bargain where they see Intel now and the kind of state it's in and the turnaround it needs, but also the potential it has. And when you see the investment coming from stuff like the CHIPS Act, the infrastructure it has in place, the 20 billion something quid plants it's building in Leixlip and everywhere else, there is a target on its back because the business is doing so poor in spite of all of the strengths it has. So, yeah, I'm not sure what is going to go down from here on out. I
Mm.
think Broadcom said they're not interested, but they were also sniffing around as well. So there's definitely a target on its back. What'll come from it, I don't know. I think if you're from Leaks Up, you want some form of Apollo involvement to protect what's going on there. But yeah,
Two very interesting stories this week, and they're still in play. 23andMe and Intel. They're relatively mature brands in their space, but they're totally in the midst of their own personal maelstroms, which is very interesting.
yeah. Okay, before we finish out, I'm going to do a quick elevator pitch for you. So it's a company called First Solar.
Great.
Have you heard of it?
I've heard of First Solar, Mike, but I could write on the back of a matchbox the amount I know about it.
Yeah. So I started off, out of the top 10 solar panel manufacturers in the world, how many do you think come from outside China?
None.
The answer is one, and it's First Solar. um,
Ah,
so this is important because
the
Chinese,
clue is in the question. I should have said one. I'm
yeah,
annoyed
I
at
was
myself.
trying to kind of lead you down the way. Uh,
Yeah.
It's important because Chinese manufacturers, helped by plenty of government subsidies, have been flooding the market with cheap panels in an effort to squeeze the life out of US and European competitors and essentially create a global monopoly. Um, and this is why we've seen so many solar companies suffer in the last few years. So you remember the ETF that follows I think it's the Invesco Solar ETF. It's got the ticker name TAN. Yeah,
Yes.
so that's down 60%. And it's funny because I was writing a piece on First Solar in for another publication, and we were looking at TAN over the Trump administration. I think it grew fivefold, and under the Biden administration, it was down 60%, which is so antithetical. It goes against the grain.
I'm not going to. I'm not going to. Don't look to me.
It goes against the grain, anyways. You'd think it would suffer under a Republican administration and do well under a Democratic administration, but it's not the case at all. It's actually the exact opposite. It's not really to do with the politics. It's to do with the Chinese coming in and essentially flooding the market with artificially cheap panels, and these US manufacturers can't compete. So back in May, then the Biden administration brought in plans to stop this. It doubled import tariffs on Chinese solar cells from 25% to 50%. This was actually, you probably remember this more so, it made more headlines, was the same decree that stuck 100% tariff on all Chinese EVs coming into the country.
Yeah.
Yeah. So unsurprisingly, that made a lot more headlines, but it shows the impetus behind government in deterring what China is doing and essentially creating a monopoly. It also ended an exemption on import tariffs from panels coming from Malaysia, Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam, which many Chinese manufacturers have outsourced to, and then just use this as a way to circumvent existing tariffs. So basically, betting on First Solar is betting on the top US solar manufacturer and essentially hoping or backing that by promoting domestic solar production and reducing the hold Chinese companies have had on the market, First Solar will be this main beneficiary of it all. That's the main investment thesis behind it. There's obviously way more to it. First Solar goes to commercial companies instead of residential. It's probably got the best metrics of any US solar company public listed, and it's survived a lot better than the rest of them over the last 4 years. So it's good business, and there's very strong investment thesis behind it. In that, I don't think the US government, whoever's in charge, because I realize it's a solar stock a month before a very hotly contested election, but whoever's in charge will allow complete Chinese monopoly over their domestic market, because First Solar has three plants in Ohio, and one is opening in Alabama as well. So I think they're going to be able to, they're going to protect manufacturing jobs in these states too. So whichever way it goes. So that's First Solar. Ticker symbol is FSLR, and I think it's worth a look. I think it's trading around the market multiple, so it's not an expensive stock. Good numbers, and a good motivating factor behind it. So
yeah, a friend of mine, Tom Bean, who's in the energy industry, certainly has mentioned it to me, and also mentioned FAN ETF and TAN ETF. So FAN is obviously wind, and TAN is obviously solar. I forget what the other one was. There was a third one. But yeah, it's a very interesting area that is starting to evolve, and even, believe it or not, is starting to get disrupted by AI, which is in fact an opportunity in an area that hitherto was quite commoditized and sleepy. But that's, I guess, the subject of a different podcast.
Okay. Right. That's it for today's show. Thanks everyone for listening. And Emmet, thank you very much as always for joining me. Remember, if you want to get involved with the Horizon offer, you have to email in at pod@mywallstreet.com. That's pod@mywallstreet.com. What did you call it, Emmet? The most hidden of hidden gems, I
Yeah,
think.
it
Was
is
that
the
the
most
term?
hidden of hidden gems. I certainly wouldn't have found this with a screener. I think next week, by the way, off topic, Mike, I'm going to do a Stockton loaded solo run. If yourself and Anne Marie just basically want to go and hit the pubs, that's fine. I'll go solo.
Don't have to twist my arm. Okay. Thank you very much. And we'll talk to you next week.